Fantasy football starts of the week, starting off with CJ Stroud against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who allowed the second most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks and the third most passing yards this season. Last year in this matchup, Stroud threw for 280 yards and 2 touchdowns in week 3, and then 304 yards and 2 touchdowns in week 12. Caleb Williams faces the Rams, who allowed the third most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks and the fourth most passing yards this season. The rookie's coming off of a week where he threw for 363 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, so if he limits his turnovers, he can have a good fantasy week. Zach Moss is coming off of his best game of the season, and he now faces the Panthers, who allowed the 5th most fantasy points per game to running backs and the 5th most rushing yards this season. I'm eating up the Aaron Jones revenge game narrative against the Packers this week. He has had games of 94 and 102 rushing yards. He's also caught 10 passes across the last 2 weeks. I think there is going to be a lot of offense in the Seahawks versus Lions game this week, and the Lions allowed the third most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. Fire up Jackson Smith and Jigba, who in week 2 earned 16 targets and had a huge fantasy week. If Jordan Love plays this week, I love Jaden Reed, who exploded with him for 33.1 fantasy points in week 1. The Vikings allowed the 7th most passing yards this season. The Patriots allow the 6th most passing yards this season, and I think it's the get-right week for Brandon Ayuk. Kyle Pitts' usage is trending up, and the Saints allow the 5th most fantasy points per game to tight ends this season.